everyone, it's Brett here, Lionheart84, and what a glorious day that I'm filming this video. Sun's out, it's a Sunday, it's actually the 10th of August when I'm filming this. And what led to this video was about a week and a half ago I heard a ping noise from my phone with a WhatsApp message. Excuse me. And I noticed a message that had come in from my good friend Key. He's a keen grower in London, and he's grafting lots of things and experimenting with interesting stuff. And he asked what he must have thought was, or on the face of it, seems like a very innocuous question. And basically it said, "Hi Brett, so what citrus will fruit outside here with no greenhouse?" Wow, what a loaded question that is. I mean, that is a question that really I could do a 2-hour video on that, and I'd still not have all of the information out there, and it would cause arguments and debate and disagreement from loads of different people who'd have their own opinions or doing different things. So what I thought I'd do is just a fairly brief video about citrus and hardiness, because it's just not an easy question to answer. I mean, there's very few citrus that you could just stick in your garden somewhere and leave them like you could an apple tree and think they're going to survive or produce fruit. That is a really tough question if you're not going to use a greenhouse, a conservatory. Now, things to take into account are not just whether or not the obvious thing is whereabouts in the country are you. He's in North London, so and I'm sort of kind of in northeast London, so basically we have a more favourable climate than many parts of the country. You'd be all right down on the south coast, probably down in the southwest and some parts of the east coast. It's pretty mild as well, but obviously there will be parts of the country where it's near impossible to grow any citrus outside all year round, and even the conditions you try and grow them in can make a big difference. So we'll run through a few things. Now the first thing is cold hardy citrus. The most obvious one here, and the one that is very hardy here, I mean it is in the citrus family or closely related to citrus, although it's not considered meant to be a true citrus in terms of oranges and lemons, but it's Poncirus trifoliata. Now it's a deciduous citrus plant that obviously has the leaves of three segments on them. That's why it's trifoliata. Has very large spines on it, and as I said, it's deciduous. It drops its leaves in winter, and it seems to be very hardy. I've seen them growing outside as large specimens in several botanic gardens over here. There's certainly, I don't think there'd be any problems with them being hardy to -10 or -12 centigrade. I've got one myself. It's left outside in a pot, it's not in the ground, and it's certainly very hardy. However, in common with other hardier citrus, the fruits are, let's just say they're inedible. I mean, you can use them in some form or other. You might better squeeze the juice in cooking, but they're small, very hard, very sour, acidic fruits with vast quantities of seeds. And basically over the years people have been trying to use it in breeding programs with other citrus to try and get the other citrus hardier. Now we don't have the luxury of getting many cold hardy citrus varieties in this country. They're a lot easier to get in America, for example, where people have been working on breeding programs for some time to develop citrus that would have a sort of a fairly edible fruit or usable fruit, more so than Poncirus. But from what I've seen of tastings that people have done, I know my friend G, Virginia Fruit Farm, has got a lot of cold hardy or much more cold hardy citrus, but a lot of them seem to produce very tough skins, very, very seedy fruits that are very sour. I mean, there's no, there aren't any good sweet oranges or sweet mandarins or sweet grapefruits that would be considered to be very, very cold hardy. Certainly there are some citrus that are more cold tolerant, but one of the things that will make a difference is whether you've planted them in ground or got them in pots. I think one of the enemies of citrus in our long winters is actually the wet, because the citrus that's kept dry seems to be more cold tolerant than citrus that's got wet roots. I mean, the Poncirus is very tolerant of wet roots, and of course you know, it makes life a lot easier if you get a citrus that tolerates wet roots. But you know, I've noticed that they'll have a lot of citrus, and I'm including sort of oranges, lemons, clementines, mandarins, satsumas, grapefruits, even pomelos, caviar, limes, or basically the finger limes. A lot of them seem to tolerate sort of 1 degree, 0, -1, even -2 without serious damage, as long as they're kept on the dry sides and preferably under cover, away from rain and away from wet frost. There are certain citrus which are sweeter citrus that are more cold tolerant. Satsuma is certainly one that comes to mind. A lot have been bred in Japan where they get quite cool winters, but I haven't yet convinced myself of their hardness outdoors in the UK. And of course, if you've got them in pots, they're going to be a lot more exposed to sort of extra cold weather, because if you've got a pot standing on you know, above ground, obviously the soil's going to freeze a lot earlier, a lot easier, and that can damage the roots on them. Now, so far my experience of citrus I've had outside is, or try to leave outside, is they get very yellow and sickly looking in the winter months, with a lot of sort of discoloured brown leaves. They almost look diseased, but they're not. And I think one of the problems is they go into complete dormancy in winter, and the roots are not actively, they might be sitting in water, but they're not actively pulling up nutrients even. They're not actively pulling up nutrients and feeding the plant, so they tend to deteriorate when the roots are inactive. And of course, if they get waterlogged, the roots rot because they're not absorbing the water out of the ground. So just to sort of start running through a few things that can make a difference, because obviously I've got friends that are growing citrus outdoors and not in a greenhouse, but they're not fully exposed in winter, or they're in very favourable areas. What it seems possible to do is, if you can protect your citrus to keep it ideally frost free outdoors in winter, if you can grow them under some kind of frost fleeces, or make up a frame for them with some kind of canvas or frost fleece over it, and even better if you can put a heat source under there, like incandescent lights or heated water, or even a very small tubular oil heater, and you can keep that all dry under there. They seem to be tolerant of much colder temperatures because their little microclimate's warmer. Now, Mike Ambersley, for example, is growing, has built himself some miniature, they're almost like a miniature greenhouse, these miniature sort of enclosures that he will put lights in and small oil heaters, so when the weather gets below freezing he can flip those on, and it gives them a little microclimate, and that also protects them from continuous rain. So when we get wet spells in winter, his plants aren't effective. Now at the moment that seems to be working very nicely. Now Peter Entwistle, he's got one planted in ground, I think it's a Satsuma, right up north, sort of not far from Manchester, and an avocado as well. Now he has built sort of an enclosure around his around those plants, which are planted in ground, I should add, they're not in pots. He's built miniature enclosures around them of some kind of frost fabric or fleece, and he puts incandescent lights underneath there wired into his mains, which he can flip on whenever it looks like the temperature's going to get below freezing, and that heats up that microclimate area inside the little enclosures he's built, and that's working really, really well. His citrus and both his avocado flew through last winter without any problems, and obviously the enclosure gives them protection from excess rain as well, so they're not sitting waterlogged, and he's also planted them slightly above grade. Now, ideally, citrus should be grown in they should really be grown in a greenhouse or conservatory here, because one of the other issues is the fruits. Now, if you can find a short season fruit, something like a Satsuma that flowers in about May or June or even earlier, my experience has been that the fruits only take about 6 or 7 months from flower to maturity. So if you can get them early enough in summer, the flowers, there's a good chance you'll have fruit ready by probably November or December before it gets too cold. And in some cases the fruit's actually triggered by the ripening of the fruit's actually triggered by cooler temperatures. So if you can get a short season fruit, I think there's a good chance of getting to flower outside. I mean, you could always have the plant outside until December and then just cover it or bring it inside for shelter for 2 or 3 months till the spring came again, and therefore that should fruit outside without a greenhouse. Now, the problem with a lot of the other citrus, larger fruited ones, navel oranges, grapefruit, pomelos, certainly some of the bigger lemons, is they take a lot longer than 6 or 7 months to get mature fruit. The problem is the fruits can often take 10 to 12 months, and obviously the issue is it means they're going to be on the tree all winter as well. There's no way you can get them to flower early enough in the year to have ripe fruits by December. So, excuse me. So the larger the fruit, the citrus fruit, and the longer it takes to mature, the harder it's going to be to grow outside. Now, there are certainly some more cold tolerant citrus such as yuzu. Now, I tried a yuzu in ground, and the plant actually died in December 22 when we had what I would describe as the Arctic blast. We had about a week in December of temperatures down to -7 at night, and it didn't get above freezing during the day, and that lasted for about a week. And we also had about probably a foot of snow, about 30 centimetres. I'm not sure without looking what -7 is in Fahrenheit, but I'm thinking about 18 to 20 Fahrenheit, and it was just too cold for the yuzu. But there is a reason behind that. The yuzu is reputedly hardy comfortably to -10. However, the yuzu I had was grafted on a less hardy rootstock, and that's another thing to consider when you're discussing citrus cold hardiness. I suspect it was on a bitter orange rootstock. Now, they're only hardy to about -2 or -3 safely, and those low temperatures we got, I noticed that the citrus part of the plant, i.e. the grafted section, didn't take serious damage, but the rootstock was killed stone dead by the cold, and naturally it then followed that the top part of the plant, the yuzu, died as well. The bark all split open from frost damage on the rootstock, and once that had happened, the plant was absolutely dead. And gradually, over a period of about 6 to 8 weeks, initially it looked okay, the yuzu, it looked green, but then gradually the whole plant turns black at the top half, and obviously you could see that the rootstock was dead, and that's what killed that plant. Now, if you had a yuzu grafted on a Poncirus rootstock, or it was growing on its own roots, then I think that the yuzu would be hardy outside, certainly in my part of the UK. Now, yuzu is a little bit more usable. It's certainly more usable than the Poncirus. I mean, the Poncirus fruit, I have tasted it several times to see, and as I said before, it's pretty dire. But if you want to grow a hardy citrus outside and just say that you've grown one and you've had flowers and fruit, the Poncirus is the way to go. But the Yuzu does appear to be hardy enough to grow outside in the southeast on its own roots, or perhaps a Poncirus rootstock if they're compatible. So I have got another Yuzu, but the rootstock is unknown, and again I assume it's going to be on a bitter orange, citronella, something like that. So I wouldn't risk the plant outside, because although the top part is cold resistant, if your rootstock dies, obviously you've got nothing to feed the top part of the plant. So you could, if you were going to experiment outside here, consider trying citrus that you know are grafted on a Poncirus rootstock, or you've grafted them yourself. Either you've bought them off a supplier who's confirmed what the rootstock is. Now, it's worth having a go outside, but you must bear in mind that the rootstock surviving doesn't mean the top of the plant's going to survive. The rootstock will add a little bit of cold hardiness to the top part of the plant, and obviously it will probably impart some tolerance. So if Poncirus is tolerant of wet soil, obviously the rootstock's fine because the graft is fine because it's on the rootstock which is more wet tolerant. However, you've got to bear in mind that you can't just put a pomelo or a grapefruit or a navel orange onto a Poncirus rootstock and assume it will be as hardy as the rootstock. It won't be. I mean, if you get -1 or -2, that will damage most of the sweeter, better known citrus quite badly. So hence the reason I don't grow any in ground. I mean, if you saw my citrus video recently, you'll know I had a Myers lemon planted in ground as an experiment, and that died back to the ground, or it died back to the graft in December 22, and I thought the plant had died completely, but then it sent up a shoot the following June, summer 23. But the problem was I didn't know if it was if it was definitely a Myers lemon. Without knowing what the rootstock was, I could see the shoot wasn't Poncirus, but it could have been something like a citronmello or a bitter orange, although people were they also felt that it probably was the Myers lemon sending up a shoot. I didn't know for sure, as it was a grafted plant, but it has proved to be a lemon this year, because I didn't see the flower, but it set a tiny embryo fruit, which is clearly a lemon. So, I know it's a lemon plant. But really, to consider growing citrus outside, there's also another friend called Nigel who's down on the south coast of Sussex, where obviously it's a lot milder. Now, he grows all his citrus outdoors all year round. However, he grows them against the wall of his house, which obviously gives out a lot of warmth in winter and make a big difference. And he's created a sort of like a frame of shelves they sit in against the wall of the house, and if he gets a really cold spell coming in, he has like a cover that he pulls down to cover them, and I believe he has like an oil tube heater in the bottom of that cover, so on nights where it looks like it is going to be very cold, -3, -4, he will turn that on, and that will then keep them frost free. And his ones are fruiting well outside. He's been a citrus grower for many years, so he really knows what he's doing, and he's growing them overseas as well. And his citrus, and they're all in pots, I should say, they're not in the ground, but they're in pots, and they're growing against a house wall, which obviously gives a good microclimate. It may be south facing, I'm not sure, but obviously he has control over the watering of the pots. They may get some rain on them, it's excessive rain at times, but I believe he just pulls the polythene cover down if there's too much rain, so they're kept just lightly moist in winter, so there's no real problems with root rot. So I think, Key, if you're still watching this video, I wouldn't say there are many hardy citrus that you can grow outside, especially if you're not going to protect them in winter. You've got to look at short season fruits like Satsuma, which do happen to be The Satsumas are a hardier citrus. Just going to take another sip. Satsumas are certainly a much hardier citrus, as are kumquats. The problem with the kumquats is they're very cold tolerant, but they don't like cool summers. To stimulate flowering and fruit production, you need very, very warm weather. So the problem with growing a kumquat outside permanently is, although it will be slightly more cold tolerant in winter and may survive, it's quite possible, without finding some way to raise the heat locally to the plant, it's quite possible that it won't flower and fruit for you again. They're fine when you buy them and they've got fruits on, but they're quite challenging to get them to fruit a second time. I think you, as I said, you should consider Satsumas, which may fruit outside, especially planted in grounds once they're well established, because they only take about 6 or 7 months from flower to fruit. Some of the lemons are more cold tolerant, limes aren't. Perhaps the micro citrus, like the caviar or finger limes, because I've discovered that when they do flower, they only seem to take about 5 or 6 months again to get from flower to fruit. Obviously yuzu, but you really want to make sure that it's either on its own roots or on a Ponceros rootstock, and that could be possibly left outside all year round with minimal protection. I mean, there's nothing to stop you throwing a couple of layers of frost fleece over if we suddenly find we're going to get -5 or -6 for a night. It doesn't do them any harm. In fact, this winter just gone, I left about maybe 4 or 5 citrus outside, and I actually threw a frost fleece over, and I pretty much left it over them permanently for about 2 months, because a little bit of light gets through the frost fleece, and to be honest, when they're dormant, the plants, they don't really photosynthesize, so they don't really need any light to get to the leaves. It's only when you grow them in a greenhouse that they may keep growing. So I don't think you could just go and get a navel orange and plant it outside, or a Eureka lemon, or any of the one, or grapefruit, or the ones that require more heat, mainly because the fruits, well, you'll have to find some way to protect the fruits in winter, because they'll still be on the plant in winter, and if they get frozen, the fruits, they're ruined inside. In fact, when we got the -7, I think my yuzu actually had a couple of fruits on it and they froze solid, which ruined them, but it didn't matter because the plant then died from the cold anyway. So if you are prepared to find a way to attempt to protect your citrus, if you can find a way to protect them in winter, not necessarily with a greenhouse, because obviously you're talking about growing citrus outdoors without a greenhouse, I still think they're going to need some protection, especially if they're holding fruits in winter, because any frost is likely to spoil those fruits. And of course, if the plants aren't protected and they deteriorate badly, it takes them months and months to recover before they'll flower and set fruits again. Obviously, again, you've run out of time. So it was, I could have gone on for 2 hours, and I've obviously will have forgotten lots of things in this video, and some people will tell me that they're growing citrus outside unprotected and they're fruiting. But I think that really, if you want most citrus to fruit and you're going to attempt to do it outside, you're going to have to create a microclimate for them and protect them in winter. But as I said, I think that we know Ponceros are going to be fine. You haven't got to worry about those. And probably yuzu, as I said, if it's on its own rootstock. Satsumas, but again, you've got to be careful, because although the plant itself is a bit more cold tolerant, if it's on a rootstock that's not cold tolerant, such as Volcamer bitter orange, -2 or -3 is likely to cause serious damage to the plant. The best answer is to have these wonderful enclosures like Mike's created. You can, if need be, put little lights in them in winter, or little oil heaters at the bottom. Obviously it all costs money. You've got to have the time to do it, and you've got to make sure you turn them on when the weather's going to get cold, unless you've got thermostatic controls on them. But it is doable. But of course, the other problem with these little enclosures is you can't let the plants get big. You're not going to be growing an 8-foot tall citrus fruit and a little polythene enclosure. I mean, Mike's plants are probably mostly only, you know, 2 or 3 feet tall, maybe a metre tall, and you can get them inside the enclosure. But once they get a lot bigger, what are you going to do to protect them? As you probably know, I've planted a white sapote in ground, which is lunacy, and I'm going to try an avocado in ground, but I've got to find a way to heavily protect them for 2 or 3 years, because without heavy protection, any light frosts is going to seriously damage them or kill them. Only a mature tree is likely to recover from bad frost damage, like the big avocados in London, but when they were young they probably got killed back quite regularly and then regrew. And that's likely to happen in my garden. Same with citrus. I've seen a lot of citrus growing outside in London, but when we got that Arctic freeze in December 22, a lot of them took very serious damage or were killed back heavily, and obviously because they were well established plants they grew back. So I think a lot of protection's involved if you do want to grow them outside, but hell, if you know, there's no harm trying, but it's just bearing in mind it's not going to be easy. You don't just stick an orange in your garden, an orange tree, and expect it to survive. People who try to grow these outdoors are prepared to invest some time and money into giving them winter protection, but even then they struggle to fruit because the damage or the setback they get in our sort of well, I know we get autumn, winter and spring, but really our winters as far as citrus are concerned are virtually 5 or 6 months long, because it's cold from mid-autumn right the way through to mid-spring. It's not just our 3 months of proper winter we get, it's the cold periods either side that set them back and hold them back from developing. So you're not going to get fruit development when it's 7 or 8 degrees centigrade. The plants go into dormancy. So it can be done, but I wouldn't sit here and say, give you a list of long citrus that are cold hardy enough to grow outside unprotected in the UK, except for obviously Ponceros, some of the crosses that have been developed in America that I can't remember the names of now, that have Ponceros as one of the parents. They're definitely more cold tolerant, but is it worth eating the fruits? I don't know. And obviously yuzu, if you've got it on the right rootstock and planted in the right position, looks likely to be hardy enough to grow outside. We'll wait and see. Anyway, that was I've made that as brief as video. I can't see the sun shining on the screen and in my face as to how long it's been, probably about 20 something minutes, but you could waffle on for 2 hours, but no one's going to listen anyway. But there we are, Key. I hope that's answered a couple of your questions. It wasn't a simple answer, which is why I didn't answer on WhatsApp. I said I'd make a video. Anybody who stayed with me, thanks for watching the video. Please give me a thumbs up. Obviously share the video if you think anybody would like to consider what citrus they might like trying to grow outside in certain parts of the country, and what extent they're prepared to go to try and protect them to do what is very difficult. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything to subscribe, and please remember to click on the bell if you'd like to know when new videos do come out, and I'll see you in my next, most likely much shorter video. Brett out for now.